Hello, I'm Mr. Byron. My own daughter stole $30,000 from me, then had the nerve to accuse me of embarrassing her at Thanksgiving. But that wasn't the worst part. The next day, I bought her company, and you won't believe what happened next. This isn't just about money. It's about years of betrayal, disrespect, and me finally taking back what's mine. What would you do when your own flesh and blood tries to destroy everything you've worked for? Well, I decided it was time to flip the script. Thanksgiving was always supposed to be a time for togetherness, a time to reflect on the things we're thankful for. But as I stood in the kitchen, looking out over the spread I'd spent all day preparing, something didn't feel right. My family, the people I had given everything for, seemed to have drifted farther away with each passing year. The scent of roasted turkey and freshly baked pies filled the room, but it couldn't mask the tension in the air. I knew this dinner, like every Thanksgiving dinner before, would be more about what wasn't said than what was. I'm Mr. Byron, the patriarch of this family. 65 years old now, with more gray in my hair than I care to admit. I had built my life on sacrifice, on working hard and providing for my children, ensuring they wanted for nothing. Yet here I was, standing alone in the kitchen, wondering why I felt so invisible. My children? They didn't even notice. Tonight, like every other Thanksgiving for the past few years, I'd set the table, prepared the food, and waited for my children to arrive. But this year, the tension was thicker than ever. My daughter, Ebony, the one who owed me $30,000 from the loan I had given her 5 years ago, wasn't making eye contact. The others, my 2 sons and their families, exchanged awkward glances, never really saying much to me or each other. It was as though the years of silence had formed an unspoken wall between us all. Dinner was served, but the conversation was forced. The clinking of forks and knives against plates echoed the empty words we exchanged. The food was good, but it didn't taste the same. Not when you know the people you've fed don't appreciate it, don't appreciate you. Ebony sat across from me, avoiding my gaze, picking at her mashed potatoes. She hadn't repaid a cent of the $30,000 I had lent her to help save her business years ago. A loan she'd promised to pay back, but had instead ignored for months, even years. "Ebony," I said, finally breaking the silence, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about the money you owe me." She didn't even flinch. She just kept staring at her plate. "Stop begging for money, Dad," she said, her voice laced with anger and disdain. "It's embarrassing." The room went silent. My sons looked at each other, but said nothing. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't the first time I'd been disrespected by my own flesh and blood, but it stung every time. I'd worked my whole life, provided everything I could for them, and now, here I was, sitting at the table, begging for what was rightfully mine. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't. Not now, not in front of them. They didn't know the sacrifices I'd made, the years of hard work I'd put in to build a life for them. They didn't understand the quiet nights I spent, wondering if they'd ever truly appreciate what I'd done for them. But I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let this moment pass without making a change. "I'm not begging, Ebony," I said, my voice steady but with a sharp edge. "I'm asking for what you owe me. I've been patient long enough." Her eyes finally met mine, but there was no guilt, no remorse, just defiance. "You've always been the one to give, Dad," she spat. "But you never learn, do you? Always playing the martyr. It's pathetic." Her words cut deep, but I kept my composure. The years of practice in hiding my hurt had made me an expert. I could feel the weight of the years I'd spent sacrificing for my family bearing down on me, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't going to let her or anyone see me as weak. Not now, not ever. That night, I went to bed with a storm brewing inside me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. I was done with being overlooked, done with being disrespected. I had spent my life giving, and what did I have to show for it? A house full of ungrateful children, a legacy of sacrifice that no one seemed to value. But I wasn't going to let this go on any longer. The next morning, I woke up with a decision in mind. As I stood at the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee, I pulled out my phone and texted my bank. Cancel all their credit cards. It was a simple message, but it would change everything. My children didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to shift in a way they wouldn't forget. I wasn't angry. I was calm, clear-headed. It was a lesson, one they'd never forget. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I didn't need to. I let them enjoy their breakfast, let them think things were fine, but I knew better. I had finally taken control. Later that morning, my daughter called. She was in a panic, screaming into the phone. "Why are you doing this to me?" she shouted, her voice filled with fear. "You're ruining my life." Her words were full of desperation, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I hadn't ruined her life. I'd just shown her what it felt like to face the consequences of her actions. "I'm not ruining your life, Ebony," I said, my voice steady. "I'm teaching you a lesson." The power had shifted. For the first time in years, I was no longer the one who was invisible, no longer the one they could walk over, taking me for granted. I had finally reclaimed my power, but this was only the beginning. The next steps would be the hardest. My family was going to have to learn the hard way that respect had to be earned, not demanded, and I was going to make sure they learned it. "It's not about the money anymore," I said to myself as I stared out the window watching the clouds roll by. "It's about respect." The morning after Thanksgiving was quiet. The kitchen, which had once been filled with the hum of voices and the clink of silverware, now sat in a heavy silence. I stared out the window, watching the fall leaves drift across the yard, lost in my thoughts. Ebony's words from the night before still rang in my ears. "Stop begging for money. It's embarrassing," she'd said. The sting of her words hurt more than I cared to admit, but I refused to show it. I knew I had done the right thing, but the emotional toll was already starting to weigh heavily on me. I had given everything for my family. Every sacrifice I made was for them, and yet here I was, disrespected and dismissed by my own flesh and blood. I thought about the money, about how Ebony had taken advantage of me for so long. $30,000 was no small sum, and the fact that she hadn't even made an effort to repay it made my blood boil. But I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. Not anymore. The phone call the night before had been a wake-up call. Ebony's voice had been frantic, full of desperation. She was angry, blaming me for ruining her life. But it wasn't about her life anymore. It was about me. It was about regaining my respect and showing her that actions have consequences. And the consequences were just beginning. I knew that the peace in the house wouldn't last long. There was an eerie stillness in the air, like the calm before a storm. I could feel it deep in my bones. Ebony would confront me, and when she did, it wouldn't be pretty. I had braced myself for this moment, prepared for the fallout. But no matter how much I prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to change everything. The phone rang just as I was about to sit down for breakfast. It was Ebony. I knew it was coming, but the anger in her voice still caught me off guard. "Why are you doing this to me?" she shouted, the words laced with panic. "You're ruining my life." I took a deep breath, not allowing my emotions to get the best of me. "I'm not ruining your life, Ebony," I said, my voice steady. "I'm teaching you a lesson." She wasn't having it. She went off, ranting about how I had no right to cancel her credit cards, how she would sue me for financial misconduct. Her words were sharp, full of venom, but I stood firm. I had reached my breaking point, and I wasn't going to back down. "I'm your father," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "And it's my job to teach you responsibility. You think you can ignore me and do whatever you want, but those days are over." She kept going, threatening me with lawyers and legal action. But I didn't flinch. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to manipulate me, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. As I hung up the phone, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I had spent so many years giving, sacrificing, and taking care of everyone around me. But now, as I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized that it was time to focus on myself. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect. But I knew this was only the beginning. I could feel the storm coming. The next few days were going to be rough, but I was ready. I had been preparing for this moment for years, and when it came, I would be ready to stand my ground. The emotional cost of this decision was starting to hit me, but I couldn't let it distract me. I had a plan. I had to stay calm, detached, and focused on what came next. The battle for control had just begun. Later that morning, I got the letter. It came in the form of a lawyer's notice. Ebony was suing me for financial misconduct. She claimed I had abused my power, taking control of her finances without her consent. I had expected this, but that didn't make it any easier to deal with. She was playing dirty, trying to turn the tables and make me the villain, but I wasn't going to let her. The letter from her lawyer was just the first step in what was sure to be a long, ugly battle. The rest of the family, who had been silent during the Thanksgiving dinner, now found themselves drawn into the fray. Some of them sided with Ebony, while others, surprisingly, stood by me. My sons, who had been passive observers for too long, finally seemed to be taking sides, but even that wasn't enough to change the reality of the situation. As the pressure mounted, I remained calm. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew that I had to face this head-on. I couldn't afford to back down now. The fight for my respect had only just begun. That evening, I got a knock on the door. Ebony stood there, her face flushed with anger. "You need to reverse what you've done," she demanded. "You've crossed the line. This is your last chance." Her words were harsh, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. But I wasn't moved. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. "I've already made my decision," I said, standing tall in the doorway. "Now you will face the consequences." Her face twisted with rage, but I remained calm. I wasn't backing down. I had waited too long for this moment, and I wasn't going to let her destroy it. The family had to learn the hard way that there were consequences to their actions, and I was going to make sure they learned it. The letter arrived like a punch to the gut. As I unfolded the legal notice, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was happening. Ebony had taken it there. She'd sued me for financial misconduct, claiming I had illegally canceled her credit cards. I sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. I couldn't believe the audacity. Of all the things she'd done, this was the final straw. I knew what this meant. A legal battle had begun, and I was at the center of it. But even as the shock settled in, a part of me felt something else: relief. Finally, the gloves were off. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The moment I'd made that decision to take action, I had set a chain of events into motion, and as much as I wished I could avoid conflict, there was no going back now. I had prepared myself for this moment. This was about more than money. This was about respect, dignity, and standing up for myself. It was a battle I wasn't going to lose, no matter how tough it got. Sitting in my chair, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. The phone call from the night before, Ebony's frantic voice still echoed in my head, accusing me of ruining her life. But I hadn't ruined her life. I'd only given her a taste of the reality she had been avoiding. I looked over the letter again. The words were harsh, accusing, and bitter. She was claiming I had exploited her financially for years, that I had taken advantage of her trust. I felt my anger rising. How could she do this to me? After all I had done for her, this was the thanks I got? But then I remembered. This wasn't just about me being hurt or angry. This was about proving that I wasn't the man she thought I was. She couldn't just walk all over me anymore. I had been silent for too long. Now it was time to fight back. As the day passed, I went through the motions of normal life. But in my mind, all I could think about was what was coming next. I knew this would tear the family apart, but it was necessary. I had to set the record straight, not just with Ebony, but with all of them. Some of my other children had already shown signs of picking sides. Some of them, like my eldest son, stood by me. But others, especially my daughter's closest allies, were starting to question my actions. I could feel the tension building. This was no longer just about money, it was about everything. The respect I had earned over the years, the The sacrifices I'd made for them all seemed to be forgotten. Later that afternoon, I went to see my lawyer. The conversation was somber. The lawyer, a seasoned pro who'd seen it all, didn't sugarcoat anything. "This is going to be a long, messy fight," he warned. "She has the financial resources to drag this out." I nodded, understanding the stakes. But there was something else he said that struck me deeper. "This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about your pride, your dignity. You have to stand your ground." I could feel the pressure building. The lawyer suggested we start gathering all the documents, bank statements, emails, and text messages, everything that would support my case. I left his office feeling both empowered and exhausted. This fight was only beginning. Over the next few days, I gathered everything I could find. Bank statements, receipts, old letters. I started putting together the pieces of the puzzle. I had to be thorough. This wasn't going to be a quick win. But the more I looked at the evidence, the more I felt I was right. Ebony was wrong. I had helped her when no one else would, and now she was trying to turn the tables on me. Then came the twist. While going through the documents, I stumbled across something unexpected. It was a signed agreement from several years ago, an agreement that Ebony had agreed to repay the money I had lent her. She'd signed it, acknowledging the debt. I couldn't believe it. This was the solid proof I needed, the missing piece of the puzzle. With this agreement in hand, I felt a surge of confidence. This was the turning point. Ebony had thought she could play me for a fool, but now I had a trump card. The tables had turned. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was going to win this fight. The next few days were filled with tension. The family continued to take sides, and the emotional cost was becoming evident. Some of my children supported me, but many others had already sided with Ebony. I couldn't help but feel the weight of their judgment. It was like I had lost the family I had spent so many years building. And then the pressure intensified. Ebony, desperate to maintain control, ramped up the legal threats. She threatened to take everything, my house, my savings, everything I had worked for. I could feel the walls closing in. But despite it all, I stood firm. I had to. There was no turning back now. In the quiet moments, I thought about the sacrifices I had made. The times I had gone without. The times I had put their needs before my own. And yet, here I was, being treated like a villain. I had endured enough. This battle wasn't just about money or legal threats. It was about my survival, my dignity. As I sat alone in my living room one evening, staring at the framed photos of my children and grandchildren, I knew I was ready. I was preparing for the fight of my life. And this battle would change everything. The legal fight had begun, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were heavy with the weight of what I had set in motion. The legal papers kept coming, each one more official than the last. Ebony had made it clear she wasn't backing down. The tension within the family grew like a storm on the horizon waiting to break. She wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting the very foundation of our family. And in her wake, the cracks began to show. It was clear that this had gone beyond a financial dispute. The lawsuit had exposed something deeper, something that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. My children were no longer just my children. They were divided, taking sides, forming allegiances based on fear, loyalty, and old grudges. As much as I wanted to pretend everything would be fine, I knew this battle was going to destroy what was left of our unity. I had no illusions about this. The anger in Ebony's voice from that first phone call, her accusations, still rang in my ears. The bitterness she had for me now felt like a living thing, breathing in every room of our house. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about her being ungrateful. It was about my dignity, about respect. And as I sat at the kitchen table sorting through more legal papers, I felt it, a deep, aching sense of betrayal. It wasn't just Ebony, it was the others too. The silence from the others, my other children, hurt more than anything. They had stood by while she went after me, without saying a word. It stung. They were letting this happen. I could feel the weight of it all, the sadness of it, the unfairness. How had things gotten to this point? Had I failed them all somehow? For a brief moment, I doubted myself. But then, something inside me snapped back. No, I wasn't the one who was wrong here. I had given them everything. And now, it was my turn to take something back. By the end of the week, the house had become a battlefield. I could feel the divide within my own flesh and blood. Some were with Ebony, some were with me, and the rest, silent, watching. Waiting for the storm to hit, I suppose. But me? I wasn't waiting. I was done waiting. I had spent my whole life giving, doing what I thought was right, all for them. But where had it gotten me? Nowhere but here. I spent a lot of time thinking about the situation, and as I sat with that realization, I saw the family for what it had become. Not a family. A group of people with their own agendas, their own wants, their own needs. Ebony was doing what she had always done, manipulating, twisting, things to suit her needs. And the others? They were either too scared to speak up, or too wrapped up in their own lives to care. Then came the moment I knew would come. My lawyer called. She had sent me another piece of paper. A letter. She was suing me for everything. And I mean everything. My house, my savings, my life. The words were hard to read. But I did. Every word. I kept reading. I'm going to take everything from you. You'll regret this. You've made your choice. I sat back in my chair, staring at the letter. The audacity of it all. She had always known how to play the game, always knew how to make people feel guilty, how to get what she wanted. But now, I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let her take it all from me, not without a fight. I kept thinking about the family gatherings, Christmas dinners, birthdays, vacations, times when we all sat at the table, sharing a meal, laughing, talking. That was all gone now. This fight had divided us. The children that had once been so close were now on different sides of this war. Some of them had taken her side, out of fear or loyalty, and others, those who had always seen me as the rock, stood by me. But I could feel the pressure mounting. I hadn't just lost money or property. I had lost my place in the family. I had lost the respect I thought I had earned. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest part of it all. This was bigger than the fight for money. This was about my dignity. This was about the years I had spent building a family, and now it was crumbling. But even in the midst of this, there was something else. Something unexpected. My grandson Mark came to me one evening. He had seen how things were falling apart, and he saw how much I was hurting. He had been quiet about it all, but now he spoke. "Grandpa," he said, "I know they don't see it, but I do. I've seen how they've treated you, and it's not right." That was it. That small moment of understanding was the spark I needed. Mark's words were like a light in the dark. I had been so focused on the fight that I had forgotten why I was fighting in the first place. It wasn't just for money, for pride, or even for respect. It was for me, for my dignity, for my family, the one I had built, and the one I was about to save. The next morning, my lawyer called with more news. The truth had come out. Financial records that Ebony had never disclosed were now in our hands. These records showed that she had been lying about paying back the money I lent her. She had been playing games, and now I had the evidence to expose her. The power had shifted. For the first time, I felt like I was the one in control, and I wasn't going to let this slide. Not anymore. She had crossed a line, and now I had the tools to fight back. The lawsuit, the threats, it all seemed small now, but the fight was far from over. At family gatherings, I could feel the change, the whispers, the glances. No one wanted to be the first to speak out, and I wasn't sure who would take my side and who would stay loyal to Ebony. But I couldn't worry about that anymore. I had made my choice, and now I was going to stand by it. As I stood in front of that framed family picture, looking at the faces of my children, my heart hardened. I had given everything to them. I had worked my whole life for them. But I wasn't going to let them take what was mine anymore. They had pushed me to the edge, but they wouldn't push me over. And with that quiet determination, I muttered to myself, I've had enough. It's time for me to take back what's mine. I sat in the dim light of the living room, staring at the walls that had witnessed so much of my life. The cold outside seemed to seep in, despite the warmth of the house. The tension was palpable, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The lawsuit was no longer just a matter of money. It had become something more insidious. It was a fight for dignity, for respect. And now, with Thanksgiving just behind us, and the holidays fast approaching, I found myself standing on the edge, torn between continuing this battle or letting it go. But I couldn't let it go. Not anymore. The years of silent sacrifice, the constant bending over backward for them, it had all come to this moment. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. Not my house, not my legacy, not my family. But the thought of losing it all, of tearing the family apart, weighed heavily on me. I looked out the window, watching the cold wind push against the trees, and made my decision. There was no going back. As I walked into the dining room that Thanksgiving, I could feel the tension thick in the air. Everyone was gathered around the table, but there was no warmth in their faces. Ebony sat at the head, her gaze cold and distant. The others avoided eye contact, their silence louder than words. It was as if we were all in the same room, but living in different worlds. My son, who usually kept his opinions to himself, was the first to speak, though it wasn't in my favor. "You know, you really should have handled this differently, Pop," he said, his voice laced with passive aggression. I bit back the words that rose in my throat. There was no point in arguing with him. He wasn't ready to face the truth, not yet. And Ebony, she was the one who had started this mess. As I sat down, I could feel the weight of the betrayal in the air. It wasn't just about the money. It was the fact that my own flesh and blood had turned against me. The years of sacrifice, of providing, of being the rock, it all seemed meaningless now. They had sided with her, and it hurt. I tried to swallow the hurt, but it stuck in my throat. The meal passed in strained silence, interrupted only by the clinking of forks and the occasional forced laugh. But deep inside, I could feel the pressure building. When dessert came, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Ebony looked up, and for a moment, our eyes locked. It was time. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside me. She rolled her eyes, already defensive. "What now, Pop?" she snapped, her tone sharp. "What more do you want from me? You've taken enough." The words stung, but I wasn't going to back down. "You've made this about more than money. You've turned the whole damn family against me. You've made me the villain, Ebony, and I'm tired of it. You owe me you owe this family more than just your excuses." Her face twisted with anger. "I'm just trying to survive here, Pop. You think I don't have my own problems? You've been nothing but a burden. You've always played the victim, always whining about what you've given up. It's exhausting." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I had always been there for her, for all of them. But somehow, I was the one at fault. I stood there, feeling the weight of her words like 1,000 pounds. It was no longer just about the money or the lawsuit. It was about something deeper, betrayal, and it cut me deep. But just as I thought the conversation might calm down, the bombshell dropped. "You think you know everything, but you don't. I've been holding on to something for a long time, something you don't even know about." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "I've got a will, one that says I get everything. You're nothing but a pawn, and I've been playing you this whole time." The room fell silent. My heart stopped. A will? A forged will? It was a moment that shattered everything. She had been planning this all along. The deception, the lies, the betrayal. It all came crashing down in that instant. I felt my world tilt on its axis. My own daughter had been plotting behind my back, trying to take everything I had worked for. It was the ultimate betrayal. "Don't you dare try to pull that on me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You think you can take everything?" "Well, you've got another thing coming." The anger rose in me like a storm, but I kept it under control. There was no point in shouting. I had to be smarter than that. The next few weeks were a blur of tension. Family gatherings were no longer the warm, familiar events they used to be. I found myself on the outside, looking in. The cold shoulder from my children, the whispers behind my back, the subtle glances, it was all too much. The isolation grew thicker with each passing day. Even Mark, my grandson, tried to comfort me. But the pain of abandonment was real. He could only do so much. The family had made their choices. I spent a lot of time alone, reflecting on how my life had turned out. All those years of hard work, of sacrifice, of doing what I thought was right. And now, it had all come to this. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that I had given everything for a family that didn't care. But there was a fire inside me, one that refused to go out. I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. One night, I stood outside the house, staring up at the place where I had raised my family, the place where my children had grown up, the place that now felt more like a prison than a home. I felt the cold wind against my skin, but I didn't care. I had made up my mind. "If they think they've won, they're mistaken," I muttered to myself. The fight's just beginning. The house was quiet, but the silence felt suffocating. I stood in the living room, staring out the window at the frost-covered lawn, letting the cold air from the outside creep in. The holidays were supposed to bring people together, but it was clear to me now that they only deepened the divide. My family, my own flesh and blood, had become strangers, and it was all because of this damn lawsuit. The legal battle that started as a whisper had turned into a full-blown war, and I was in the thick of it, with no way out. I had been patient, holding back, playing the long game. But the more I held my ground, the more my family pushed against me. My daughter, the one who started all of this, was relentless. The more I tried to remain calm, the more she tested my limits. The pressure was building, and I could feel it in my bones. The next family gathering was looming, and I knew that this time there would be no avoiding the inevitable confrontation. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold my tongue, but deep down, I knew I couldn't back down now. The tension at the dinner table was thick, heavier than any of the food laid out before us. It was as if the room had become a battlefield, with everyone picking their sides. Ebony, my daughter, sat at the head of the table, her face as cold as the winter wind outside. She didn't look at me, not once, not even when I entered the room. The rest of the family, avoiding eye contact or pretending to be engrossed in their plates, created a barrier between us. It was like I wasn't even there, just a shadow in a room full of people I had once known so well. As I sat down, my son, who normally didn't get involved, shot a glance at me. His eyes flicked away quickly, but not before I saw the disapproval hidden there. "You know, Pop," he started, barely looking up from his plate, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." I clenched my fists under the table. He was always the quiet one, but I could see the side he'd chosen. I wasn't surprised. After all, it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about who controlled the narrative, who controlled the family. I was no longer the patriarch in their eyes. No, now I was the enemy. The meal dragged on. My daughter made a few pointed remarks, as though she were trying to provoke me, but I held my tongue. The quiet jabs kept coming, each one sharper than the last. But it wasn't until dessert that I couldn't take it anymore. "Enough," I said, my voice low but firm. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. "I've kept quiet long enough. I want to know why you're doing this, Ebony. After everything I've done for you, why are you trying to tear this family apart?" Her face twisted in anger, but I could see the defensive walls she had built around herself. "You're always doing this, Pop. Always trying to make me feel guilty for everything." "I'm not the one who's been selfish. You are." Her words cut deep, but I wouldn't let her see that. "Selfish? I've given everything for this family. I sacrificed my life for you, and this is how you repay me?" I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the anger threatening to spill over. "You think you can just do whatever you want, manipulate everything, and no one will stop you?" Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get it, do you? I've worked hard for everything. I've struggled just like you. But you never gave me the chance to stand on my own. You never let me be independent. It's always been about you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. She was right. She had never been independent, but it wasn't for lack of trying. I had always been there, always the protector, the provider. And now, she had turned everything against me. She made me the villain. But the real blow came after dinner. Just as I thought I might finally get some peace, the doorbell rang. I didn't expect anyone, but when I opened it, my lawyer stood there, holding a manila envelope. "Mr. Byron," he said, "I have some legal papers for you." I took the envelope with a shaking hand, my stomach already twisting. As I read the papers, my heart sank. Ebony had filed for a restraining order against me, citing emotional abuse. I couldn't believe it. She had gone to the legal system, using it as a weapon against me. I had always known she would do whatever it took to win, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I felt the rage rise in me, hotter than a furnace. My hands trembled as I dropped the papers on the table. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. But as the anger surged, I realized that it wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. This was personal. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for control. And she was willing to destroy everything in the process. The isolation began to sink in. Weeks passed, and the family gatherings grew colder. The more I tried to hold on to the fragments of the family I once knew, the more they slipped through my fingers. Even my other children, the ones I had thought would stand by me, began to distance themselves. It was as if I had become a pariah, a villain in a story I never wanted to be part of. But amidst the loneliness, there was a spark. My grandson, Mark, came to visit me one day, sitting with me in the quiet of my living room. "You know, Grandpa," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I've seen what you've been through. You've done so much for this family, and I just want you to know I'm with you." It was a small thing, but in that moment, it felt like everything. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. But that glimmer of hope quickly faded when I sat down later that night, alone in my chair, reflecting on the years I had spent building a life for my family, only to watch it all crumble in front of me. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. My body was tired. My heart was heavy. But my mind was sharp. And I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, as I stood looking at the framed photo of my children and grandchildren, I made a decision. It was time to take control. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to fight back, and I wasn't going to do it alone anymore. Just as I finished making my plans, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my son, the one who hadn't spoken to me in months. His eyes were cautious, but he handed me an envelope, a silent promise in his gaze. I took the envelope, my heart pounding. This could be the turning point. I didn't know what was inside, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a chance. The fight was far from over, but with this new ally, maybe, just maybe, I could win. The days leading up to the next family gathering felt like an eternity. I sat in the quiet of my living room, the same room where I had watched my children grow up, now filled with an eerie silence. I had been playing this game for far too long, trying to hold on to what was left of my dignity, but I was done being patient, done holding back. The legal battle, the insults, the betrayals, it had all come to a head, and now I was ready to act. My son's unexpected support had given me a new sense of strength, a new purpose. As I looked at the documents he handed me, I realized that I had a chance, a real chance to take back control. No longer was I the passive one. This fight, it wasn't just about money or legal papers. It was about reclaiming my life, my legacy. The Thanksgiving gathering was upon us, and this time, I was ready for war. The family would no longer see me as the silent figure in the background. I would confront them all, my daughter, my other children, everyone who had let me down. I wasn't just going to be there as a witness to my own demise. I was going to be a force, a reminder that I still had power. I spent the days before the gathering making sure I was ready. I reviewed every document I could find, every contract, every loan agreement, every text message that had led us to this point. The truth was buried deep in the details. My daughter had made sure of that, but now I was going to dig it out and use it. I had to. I called an old colleague of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but I knew I could trust. I asked for a favor, and he delivered. This new alliance, this unexpected support, was the missing piece I needed. It wasn't just about winning the fight anymore. It was about showing my family what happens when you push a man too far. They would learn, in no uncertain terms, that I would not be underestimated. The day arrived, and I dressed carefully, methodically. I wasn't going to show up in any state of weakness. As I drove to my daughter's house, the weight of everything I had been through settled heavily on my shoulders. But it wasn't the weight of defeat. It was the weight of something much stronger, resolve. When I entered the house, it was as if nothing had changed. The same empty stares, the same avoidance. My daughter didn't look at me. She never did. The rest of the family was quieter than usual, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. They all knew something was coming. Dinner was served, but I barely touched my plate. I was watching, observing every move, every word, every slight. The conversation flowed in and out, but I kept my eyes on her. Ebony, my daughter. She had started this war. Now it was time to end it. Just when I thought the evening might pass without incident, she opened her mouth. "You know, Dad," she said, a bitter smile on her face, "I'm tired of playing these games with you. You've always tried to control me, always tried to make me feel like I owe you everything. But you know what? I don't." The room went silent. The other family members exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. They all just watched. I stood up slowly, the anger rising in me. "You think I want control over you?" I said, my voice low, dangerous. "What I want is respect. Something you've never given me. Something I've earned." She stood too, her face twisted in defiance. I think I'm the problem here. You don't get it, do you? You ruined my life, always making me feel like I wasn't good enough. You never let me breathe. And now, you're gonna sit here and tell me it's all about respect? Respect? I almost laughed. I gave you everything. I sacrificed more than you'll ever understand. And this is how you repay me? She scoffed. You've always played the martyr, Dad. Always the victim. It's pathetic. The words hit me hard, but I stayed calm. I had one card left to play. I walked to the briefcase I'd brought with me, and I opened it. I pulled out a single piece of paper and laid it on the table. It was a document, an agreement my daughter had signed years ago. An agreement to repay me for the money I'd lent her. The same money she'd conveniently forgotten to pay back. I dropped the paper onto the table in front of her. "This is what you've been hiding. You've been lying to this family, manipulating them into thinking I'm the bad guy. But now, the truth is out." Her face turned pale as she read the document. The silence in the room grew heavier, and the weight of the truth crashed down on her. She looked at me, eyes wide with shock and fear. But there was no turning back now. "You think you can just use people, manipulate them like pawns in your game?" I said, my voice steady. "Well, you're wrong. This isn't just about money. This is about respect. And I'm taking mine back." The family was stunned. My daughter didn't know how to react. She was speechless, unable to find the words to defend herself. The others just stared, too afraid to speak up, too afraid to take a side. I stood tall, every inch the man I had worked so hard to be. "I'm done with this. I've been disrespected long enough. I'm not playing this game anymore. And if any of you think you can continue treating me like this, you're mistaken." With that, I turned to leave. But as I reached the door, my daughter's voice broke the silence. "Dad, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. "We can fix this." I didn't even turn around. "No, it's too late for that. This is how it ends." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving them behind, unsure of what they'd do next. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had taken back control. The air in the house felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Every step I took seemed to echo in the silence, and I knew that what was about to happen would change everything. The Thanksgiving gathering was upon me, and for the first time in years I felt ready. Ready to take control, ready to fight for my dignity. The time for silence was over. I had been patient long enough, and now it was time to make my move. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The sacrifices I had made, the disappointments I'd swallowed, and the lessons I'd learned the hard way. I'd given everything for this family: blood, sweat, tears. And for what? To be dismissed, manipulated, treated like an afterthought? No more. This was it. The reckoning. My chance to set things right. I wasn't going to let it slip away. The family gathered as expected. My daughter, the source of this entire mess, barely looked at me as she entered the room. She had her usual smirk, like she had already won, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The others were on edge, exchanging nervous glances, wondering who would take sides. But I wasn't there to pick sides. I was there to end it. I took my seat at the head of the table. A small but significant gesture. No longer was I relegated to the background, a quiet observer in my own life. Today, I was taking control. As I settled into the chair, I felt the weight of the room shift. The quiet murmurs stopped. All eyes were on me. They could feel it too. Something had changed. My daughter, of course, wasn't one to back down. She started talking, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she tried to belittle me, but I didn't flinch. I stayed calm, let her words hang in the air, but my silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. The power was shifting, and I wasn't going to give it away. Not anymore. Then, just when the pressure was about to break me, something unexpected happened. My youngest son, the one who had been neutral throughout all of this, stood up. His face was set, determined. He didn't speak immediately, but when he did, his words cut through the tension. "I'm with Dad," he said. The room fell silent. The shock was palpable. This was a game changer. The daughter's face contorted with disbelief, and for the first time in this whole mess, she didn't have an answer. She tried to recover, tried to regain her footing, but the damage had been done. The balance had shifted. My son's support wasn't just emotional, it was a statement. It weakened her position, and she knew it. I took that moment to press forward. The verbal battle that had been simmering for months now boiled over. "You think you've manipulated this family for long enough, don't you?" I said, my voice cutting through her defenses. "You think you've gotten away with it, but I'm done. I'm not your scapegoat. Not anymore. I laid everything bare. The truth of her manipulations, her lies." I didn't raise my voice, didn't scream, but my words were calculated, sharp. I made sure every family member understood the depth of her betrayal. The room was filled with shocked silence. My daughter tried to defend herself, but her excuses fell flat. There was no turning back now. The truth had been exposed. With everything out in the open, I took control. "This isn't about money," I said calmly. "It's about respect. It's about the way I've been treated for years, the way I've been used and discarded. That ends today." I wasn't shouting, wasn't trying to start a war. I was simply taking back what was mine. The family, stunned into silence, had no choice but to listen. My daughter, still speechless, couldn't hide her guilt. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into submission. I had reclaimed my power. But just as I thought it was over, a legal document was handed to me. My daughter had struck again. She'd secretly filed for an injunction, attempting to seize my assets, trying to use the legal system to finish what she'd started. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like a weight pulling me back into the darkness, but I wasn't going to fall for it. I didn't hesitate. I wasn't going to let her win, not now. I wasn't going to let this legal battle tear me apart. "You want to fight through the courts? "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "But I'll fight for what's mine, for my dignity, for the respect I've earned." I stood there, in front of my family, a man who had been torn down and built back up. "This isn't just for me," I said. "This is for anyone who's ever been pushed aside, ignored, disrespected. I'm standing up for all of us." I turned to leave, my heart heavy, but my resolve firm. Just as I reached the door, I heard my daughter's voice. "Please, don't do this. You don't have to end it like this. We can fix this." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. "No, it's over," I said, my back to her. "You had your chance." And with that, I walked out, leaving my family to wonder if they had truly understood the weight of what had just happened. The house was quiet, too quiet. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the corners of my mind. My actions had shaken everything, and now I stood at the crossroads, unsure of what the next step would be. I had reclaimed my dignity, but the cost of it was heavy. The family had scattered, each member dealing with their own version of what had just happened. I sat alone for a while, reflecting on the long road that had led me here. The years of silence, the countless sacrifices, the betrayals I had swallowed, and the weight of all the pain I had buried deep within me. It was a hard pill to swallow, but there was something else there too, something new, a sense of empowerment, a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, I knew who I was again. I didn't regret my decision, but I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The path to healing, to restoring what had been broken, would take time, but I was ready for it. There was no going back, and for once, I was okay with that. The fallout from the confrontation had been far-reaching. Some of the family had rallied behind me, acknowledging the truth of my actions, while others, especially my daughter, felt betrayed. Her words had cut deep, but they no longer had the power to wound me like they once did. The damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. She could shout, accuse, manipulate. She had already shown her true colors. I had nothing left to prove to her. But my silence, my refusal to engage in the same toxic games, was the most powerful weapon I had. I wasn't going to fight her battles. I wasn't going to chase her approval anymore. I had learned that the hard way, and it was a lesson I wasn't going to forget. The legal battle, however, was far from over. The papers had come, the summons to court, the final showdown over the assets I had worked my entire life to build. As much as I wanted to focus on healing, the legal conflict was a reality I couldn't ignore. And yet, as I looked at the documents, I realized something. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about the respect I had fought so long to reclaim. I was fighting for something more than just my rights. I was fighting for validation. The years of sacrifice, the countless hours I spent, building a life, a family, none of it should have been dismissed so easily. I was more than just a paycheck, more than just a figurehead. I was a man, a father, and my voice deserved to be heard. As the days passed, I made my preparations. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them take what was mine. I called my lawyer, went over the plan, and prepared for whatever came next. The legal fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was no longer afraid of the fight. I was ready to face whatever it took to restore balance. The family tension was palpable. Everyone's future was on the line, and while some of them still tried to keep their distance, the air was thick with fear and uncertainty. They knew the stakes were high. They knew that everything was changing, and no one really knew what the outcome would be. But me, I had never been more certain. The day of the court hearing arrived. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating, and as I stood there facing my daughter, I could feel the weight of the years that had brought us to this moment. The courtroom felt like a battleground, and every word I spoke was a weapon. I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending the years of work, the years of sacrifice, and the right to be seen. I spoke plainly, but with conviction, about the legacy I had built, about the love I had poured into this family, and how it had been torn apart by deceit and greed. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth, laid bare, was louder than any anger I could muster. The judge listened. The room grew still. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. The truth had been spoken. Then, the twist. A figure emerged from the back of the courtroom, someone I hadn't expected to see. It was an old colleague, someone who had witnessed firsthand the manipulation and deceit that had been taking place. The testimony they gave corroborated everything I had said and exposed the depths of my daughter's treachery. The balance shifted. The momentum swung in my favor. My daughter's face went pale as the weight of the truth came crashing down. She was no longer in control. The lies she had built her case on were now crumbling before her eyes. And just like that, the power dynamic in this family had changed. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a symbolic one. It was the recognition that, despite everything, I had been right. The sacrifices I made were not in vain. I wasn't just a victim of their actions. I was a man who had fought for what was his and had won. But even in the victory, there was a deep sadness. The cost of it all weighed on me. The years lost, the relationships broken, the family fractured beyond repair. But now, I had control. I had taken back what was mine, not just my assets, but my dignity. The family, though divided, would have to find a way forward without me chasing after their approval. I had nothing left to prove. In the aftermath of the court ruling, the healing began. It wasn't easy, and some relationships would never be the same. But I worked toward reconciliation in my own way. I offered forgiveness, but only on my terms. I no longer sought validation from those who had wronged me. If they wanted to rebuild, they would have to meet me on my terms. And in those quiet moments, I found peace. Not peace with the past, but peace with myself. I had done what was necessary to move beyond the hurt, the betrayal, and the anger. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of it. As I walked away from the courthouse that day, a new chapter began. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. It was mine to shape,